1898, America claims an empire. You can tell these notes just imperialism. The items that we're going to be looking at is how America claimed Hawaii, Cuba, the Philippines, the West, meaning claim over Native American territories in the west of America, and also with China. Let's begin. So the term imperialism is basically the term based on the acquisition and exploitation of colonial possessions. So it's not only acquiring other colonies and other territories, but also seeking to exploit, mainly through different resources. So that exploitation there. We also have the term yellow press during this time period that you'll need to know this term. Yellow press is the use of bold headlines, fevered editorials, exaggerated stories of violence, sex, and corruption to attract readers and boost advertising revenues. We'll see some examples of this yellow press later on and how it plays out. But basically, these newspapers are trying to attract readers, and so they'll embellish the truth, but then the unintended consequence, or maybe even the intended consequence to get a juicy story, will be that the embellished headlines and stories will cause Americans to act in a certain way, particularly aggressive towards another country because of these stories and everything. So basically, this is the start of the fake news empire, if you will, and this is very consequential in American history. We see an example of yellow press right here. Spanish ships on our coast, even though that's an embellishment, that would get you to buy this paper and to read it, or dyed in old folds of Old Glory. That again would cause you to want to buy this paper, even if it's more of an embellishment than the whole story. We have different types of imperialism. We have economic imperialism. This one is the competition for raw materials and markets for manufactured goods. So this one deals more with commercialism, developing markets in other countries, causing other countries to desire our goods so that they can buy from America and we can become rich, and also for us to acquire raw materials from them, whether it's through slavery or whether it's through virtual slavery, just an imbalance of trade or exploitation. We also have a political imperialism. This is based in the creation of a powerful navy and spreading democracy. We can all agree that freedom and democracy is a good thing, but when a culture doesn't understand how democracy is used, they can manipulate it, and so this becomes political imperialism, where America sets up their own favorable leader or dictator in the region, but considers it democracy when sometimes it is just the opposite. Also, that creation of a powerful navy. America will acquire different ports and create different navies around the world. Cultural imperialism is the spreading of Western civilization and Western Christianity. And we'll see this played out, how this is going to cause some problems because it's going to mix Christianity with this Western civilization, causing people in other countries to think that in order to be a Christian, you have to be westernized, and that is not the case. So cultural imperialism, with this term called white man's burden, which meant it was the U.S. mission to civilize other savage nations. This was coined first by Rudyard Kipling, the British guy who authored The Jungle Book, The Man Who Would Be King, and other such stories. And so he was big into civilizing other nations. Josiah Strong was probably the best example of this in America, best meaning most popular example. He was a Christian missionary. He was big into social justice and combating social evils, which sounds really great. But he argued that the Anglo-Saxons are a superior race who must Christianize and civilize the savage races, which he argued would be good for the American economy and lesser races. So as you can see right here, he is prizing America's version of Christianity above other versions of Christianity. And though God transcends history and God transcends society. You can't say that America's version is better than somebody else's. You got to go to the source. You got to go to the Bible. You got to look at what does God prize, and are there certain superior races? No, and the Bible is very clear on that. But a question that I have for you, this sounds positive, but what's wrong with this idea? So it'd be good for you to answer that question. Maybe pause the video and answer that question in your notes. Sounds positive, but what's wrong with this idea? So if you've answered that, and you've paused and answered that, basically the discussion point, we have a couple of verses here. Colossians 3:11 says that there's no Greek or Jew, circumcised, uncircumcised, barbarian, Scythian, slave or free, but Christ is in all, and in all is all and in all. And basically what that is showing is that there's no basis for racism in the Bible. Micah 6:8 is another great passage here, I believe. He has shown you, O man, what is good and what the Lord requires of you, but to do justly and to love mercy and to walk humbly with your God. Meaning that that's the gospel. The gospel is to walk in humility before God. The gospel is to trust God. The gospel is to believe in God. The gospel is to trust in Christ's death and resurrection, not in the cultural dress that you have and this and that. However, there are some cultures that do have some evil practices, and those cultures, we could say, are backwards. And so it is good when a missionary takes what it transcends our culture and what is truth, and then brings that to a culture. But when it's just based on my culture versus your culture, then it can get very convoluted and such. Cultural imperialism, I like what Hudson Taylor did. Hudson Taylor, he was the most famous missionary. He did not change culture. He didn't focus on the culture, but he focused on changing hearts. He built a lot of hospitals as a social gospel. He was from Great Britain, so he's not American, but I think that he was a great example to the American missionaries and a model to U.S. missions. And his approach, why was it so successful? Why was it more successful than Strong's? Maybe you can pause this video and answer that in your notes as well. And once you've answered that, I think that we can see that the gospel is about the heart change. Because a lot of people, they attend church and they wear their Sunday best, but their hearts are far from obedience before God. And so the heart change is what brings obedience. The heart change of trusting God is what brings the action. And we see that in Philippians 2:12 through 13. That it's God who works in you both to will and to do for his good pleasure. As you can see right here, this map shows the intent of the United States. It wasn't so much Hawaii or Alaska or Cuba or Haiti or Samoa Islands or Guam or the Philippines were the final destination, but it was all leading to China in a sense. And we'll see how the open door with China will really encourage a lot of imperialism. As you see right here, a political cartoon written at the time, that the Philippines is just simply a stepping stone to China, and that the Philippines is not the end goal, but bringing all these different things like education and farming equipment and prosperity, American prosperity to China was the idea, which goes against Hudson Taylor's mission, but falls right in line with Josiah Strong's. So Hawaii. The cause of imperialism in Hawaii was sugar plantations. If you've heard of Dole pineapple, that's probably because San Diego is the #1 port that processes Dole pineapple from Hawaii. But also it wasn't just the sugar plantations that America was trying to protect from the Queen, but also the political authority. Queen Liliuokalani did not work well with the Americans, especially the American planters that were planting sugarcane and such. And so because she didn't work very well with them, they dethroned her. How they dethroned her? Well, they used the Marines. They ordered the Marines to help the planters to rebel, declared Hawaii to be an American protectorate over the new Hawaiian government, and so they made Sanford B. Dole president. And so the taking of Hawaii was not a civil matter. It was a issue on America trying to take another country and subjugate them. As you can see a picture right here of Senator B. Dole being sworn in as president. President Grover Cleveland, however, responds to that by investigating the matter. So the Hawaiians did get the president to investigate the matter. However, he gave simply an apology. He didn't do anything because of it. He just simply gave an apology, and that was it. And so the Hawaiians would petition this, and we'll see that a little bit later. The Philippines, the cause of the U.S. imperialism in the Philippines. The U.S. coveted strategic harbor as a naval base in the Pacific. So as you can see right here in the map, the Philippines right next to China. So it was really that harbor that was the main reason for taking of the Philippines. Also commercial opportunities in China. They wanted that connection to China with commerce. And so they took that harbor in the Philippines for that. And also the Philippines asked for U.S. help against the Spanish. And so this point right here is worth understanding that America is responding to pleas of the Philippines. The Philippines were, for a few hundred years, controlled by the Spanish, and the Spanish were not giving the Philippines a lot of freedom, and so the Philippines turned to America for freedom. However, ironically, America will basically become the next Spain and not give them true freedom. You don't need to know this, but Commodore George Dewey, his navy defeated the Spanish, and he became a famous American naval hero as a result. But then Cuba, the cause of U.S. imperialism in Cuba. Jose Marti, he asked America for help against the Spanish rule. So again, we see where you have some of these countries asking for America's help. This one as well against Spanish rule. And so yellow journalists started to hype up these stories as well of Spanish concentration camps. If you remember what type of journalism this is called, it is called yellow journalism, yellow press or yellow journalism. But then we also had the Spanish were blamed for the USS Maine mysteriously blowing up. And so you not only have Jose Marti asking America for help against the Spanish, you not only have the journalists hyping up these stories, but you do have the Spanish being blamed for this USS Maine battleship of America blowing up. Now I say blamed and mysterious because later we would find out there was actually the boiler that exploded. It wasn't a torpedo or anything like that from the Spanish. But because of this yellow journalism, Americans really thought that Spain had done it. Spain was kind of this prime target, if you will. And so we go to war because of the USS Maine being exploded. We also wanted Cuba's ports, just like with the Philippines and Hawaii. We also wanted their ports. And so it became very strategic for us to get involved and to imperialize these nations. Example of yellow journalism right here, peace treaty is ratified, awful slaughter. This one is going to be an example of yellow journalism as it relates to Native Americans. Saying that, that there's a peace treaty despite this awful slaughter. It doesn't really show that it was the Native Americans that were slaughtered, not the U.S. soldiers. In Cuba, you would have the famous Rough Riders. You don't need to know this for the test, but Theodore Roosevelt's army, he would become famous for this Rough Rider outfit in kicking Spain out of San Juan Hill and Cuba. So tensions and oppositions, the Dawes Act. This was the process of assimilation to break up tribal sovereignty. So imperialism was not just in other countries in the Pacific or in Latin America, but also in America itself. And so this Dawes Act was trying to break up the tribal sovereignty by making Native Americans more American. It Americanized Native Americans by teaching them to read and to farm. Now this sounds positive, right? It sounds like a good thing to cause them or to teach them to read and to write. we have to ask ourselves, what is the real intent? And the real intent, as we see right here, is to break up this tribal sovereignty, because America had a foreign policy with these different Native American tribes, whether it was the Kumeyaay Nation or the Sioux Nation or the Blackfoot Nation or the Cherokee Nation, the Cheyenne Nation, the Arapaho Nation. But assimilating them into American culture meant that they were going to be individuals and not a whole nation. So there's this tension of Native Americans wanting to become more modern, but at the same time not losing their integrity as a nation. The Wounded Knee Massacre in 1890 was the saddest example of this, and that's where 300 Native Americans were being forced to move. They were stripped of their arms in this move, and one of the arms went off, and it caused the army to be alarmed and to shoot in cold blood all the Native Americans, mainly women and children and older men. Now, the ghost dance had caused this yellow journalism to make the U.S. Army overly cautious and slaughter nearly 300. So it was really this yellow journalism, again, that caused the military, caused Americans, caused our government to be overzealous, to be overcautious, and to use the military in a way that was not necessary, and then ended in the death of innocent civilians. As I mentioned before, the example Into the West, if you're doing these notes in class, we'll watch a scene from this, but Into the West is a great example and shows the Wounded Knee Massacre. Also with tensions and oppositions, the Filipino resistance, Emilio Aguinaldo, who is the gentleman with the flat top on the lower left, he led the Filipinos in resistance against Spain, but he led the Filipinos in conjunction with U.S. soldiers. And so the Philippines and U.S. soldiers were on the same side against Spain. However, when the Spanish were kicked out of the Philippines, the U.S. would not recognize the Philippines as a sovereign nation, as a free government, and therefore his optimism started to decline. And so this is a sad example right here where the Philippine-American War would start to wage. You don't need to know that for the test or anything, but would wage for about 10 years. And it wasn't until World War II that we finally granted them independence. And so the Philippines would be part of American territory, not a state, but just a part of our territory for close to 50 years until we finally give them their independence after World War II. We also instituted something called the Platt Amendment. At first, the U.S. promises complete independence to the Cubans, but then we passed the Teller Amendment that set conditions on Cuba. So we're kind of giving the pseudo-independence to Cuba. We're telling them what to do. We're telling foreign nations that they can't, have free trade with them. They have to go through us first. And that really made the Cubans upset because they were asking us for independence from Spain, but we ourselves became the new Spain to them. Also in Hawaii, you'd have the anti-annexation petition. Initially, most U.S. senators agreed with the Hawaiians, but by 1898 decided to annex Hawaii anyways. And so most senators believed that the Hawaiians were right, that they should be independent, that America was wrong in forcing them to be under American rule. However, that started to change, and we just decided to annex them anyways. And so that would cause some animosity between the Hawaiians and America. Many objected to the Treaty of Paris. The Treaty of Paris ended the Spanish-American War. People such as Andrew Carnegie, Mark Twain, William Jennings Bryan, you've heard of some of these names. They thought that the Treaty of Paris was wrong. And their main objection was that imperialism went against the Declaration of Independence morally. Sadly, when people are treated like outsiders, respect doesn't apply. And that's a really good point to understand. That's a gospel truth, that when you treat people like they don't belong a part of the church because of their culture, instead of showing them God's culture, we start to see them as lesser than, instead of fellow brothers and sisters when they embrace Christ as the only way to heaven. Some review. Which countries did the U.S. liberate from Spain? If you said things like Hawaii, the Philippines, um, uh, and Cuba. Hawaii wasn't truly liberated from Spain, but the other two were. How did America treat them after their conflict? We just went through that. Why did some disagree with the Treaty of Paris? Those are good points. Okay, China. The cause of the open door policy in China. U.S. trade maximizes with the East. And so European nations decided they wanted to start carving up China. And this is during the time period of the scramble for Africa, the scramble for China. So different European nations are trying to carve her up. As you can see with this political cartoon right here, China in the back, very traditional dress at the time with the long nails, the Fu Manchu, and the long hair and the hat and such. But you can see Japan on the right, and then France, and then Russia, and Germany, and then England trying to carve up China. However, America protects China to establish and protect her markets. We also want to protect her against Spanish aggression, also against Russia and Japanese war, and so we step in and protect her. As you can see right here, the Harper's Weekly, a newspaper, drew a cartoon of America holding everybody back. And so this is an important moment in Chinese history because we really do protect China. Now, unfortunately, China doesn't see it this way at this time because they see America as promoting her culture in China. And so there's kind of this mixed message, if you will. But as you can see in this political cartoon right here, both Russia and Japan are fighting there. Korea is wondering what's going on in the Far East. And then Uncle Sam and John Bull of Britain and also Germany are saying, save the China. And so basically they're trying to protect China from Russia and Japanese war that's happening. Another good picture right here where America is putting their foot down from Puck Magazine. And so you see different European nations trying to carve up China, but the open door policy from America does protect China from becoming like a sad result of Africa and such that Europe would do. So opposition, the Boxer Rebellion. This was the anti-foreign, anti-Christian uprising in China. So even though Hudson Taylor tried his best to keep this cultural, Western culture from impacting China, Western culture still was trying to take over in China. And so there would be this opposition to that known as the Boxer Rebellion. Revive the Qin and destroy the foreign was the slogan. 8 nations, including America, would put down this uprising. And as you can see right here, the boxers, the Chinese are going to box with their hands. And it's called the Boxer Rebellion because they were using kickboxing. And we had only understood boxing with gloves as boxing. And so we didn't understand karate at the time. And so we considered their kung fu, which is from China, as boxing. But our boxing would be through the Navy and through our military. And so that's what this Harper's Weekly political cartoon is depicting. The Chinese Republic would be established as a result, and that would be the Chinese Republic before China turns communist. And China would turn communist because the Chinese Republic was established by these pro-European and pro-Western nations. And so communism would then appeal to China because it was anything but European. Presidential policies, each president would have their own plan in how to deal with different conflicts and such. And so the first one is the Roosevelt Corollary. Roosevelt Corollary, this is an extension of the Monroe Doctrine to protect with military Latin nations in Latin America and in the Pacific. And so he extends that Monroe Doctrine. He says, hey, the Monroe Doctrine of Europeans staying out of South and Latin America extends to the Pacific Ocean. So it's not just Mexico and Paraguay and Chile and Ecuador that we're trying to protect. We're also going to try to protect the Samoan Islands and the Philippines and such as free from European involvement and Asian involvement. But then President Taft, he would decide a different policy. He was dollar diplomacy. And this is basically substituting dollars for bullets. This promoted development and stability in countries so that they wouldn't need to turn to other European nations for help. And so his idea was, hey, instead of using the military, let's just use money and development in these nations. But then President Woodrow Wilson, he had this missionary diplomacy. Now, this missionary diplomacy was to promote human rights, national integrity, and opportunity. He would use missionaries, Christian missionaries, to promote this, but he wasn't concerned about people's eternal salvation. He was more concerned about the politics of everything. And so he's promoting human rights and national integrity and opportunity, things like that with his missionary diplomacy. So he's repudiating or reversing the previous interventionist policies of other presidents, and so he would believe in promoting the nations themselves, their own independence and their own sovereignty, if you will. So that's the end of these notes. Thank you for taking these notes.